This house had been the silent witness to their peaceful, orderly, and almost entirely predictable routine. Vaughn was a rigid corporate climber, a stickler for order, and a man who fiercely guarded his personal space. So when the doorbell rang one Sunday evening, and Kinsey appeared on the porch with two massive suitcases, Sloane felt the familiar rhythm of her life fracture instantly. Kinsey was Sloane's maternal cousin. At barely 23, she possessed the fresh, effortless beauty and trendy aesthetic typical of a girl fresh out of a liberal arts college. She offered a sheepish smile from the threshold. "Sloane, I'm so sorry to drop in like this," she pleaded, using that wheedling tone that had always worked like a charm on their entire extended family. Kinsey had just landed an interview for a competitive fellowship in Chicago. She was looking for a room to rent but hadn't found anything suitable yet. "Could I crash with you guys for a bit? Just a month or two until my first few paychecks come in?" For Sloane, who held family ties sacred, turning her away was impossible. "Of course you can, Kinsey. Come on in." The guest suite on the first floor was always empty, but Sloane knew she had to run it by Vaughn first. She braced herself for her husband's inevitable scowl. Vaughn despised having his routine disrupted. Even relatives overstaying a dinner party usually made him withdraw into icy silence. A house guest staying for months was bound to cause friction. However, when Vaughn descended the stairs and saw Kinsey standing in their foyer, his reaction completely defied Sloane's expectations. Vaughn's normally sharp, austere features suddenly softened. There wasn't a trace of irritation in his eyes. Instead, a flicker of eager enthusiasm crossed his face, which he quickly tried to mask with a polite cough. "Kinsey. Wow, it's been a while. How are you?" His voice was significantly warmer than its usual baseline. "Hi, Vaughn. I'm so sorry to intrude. I was hoping to stay with you guys for a little while," Kinsey replied, casting her eyes downward demurely. "Not a problem at all. This place is more than big enough for the three of us." Vaughn stepped forward, his hands effortlessly grabbing the handles of Kinsey's gargantuan suitcases, luggage that even Sloane wouldn't have dared to lift. "Let me get these to the guest room for you. You must be exhausted from the drive." "Sloane, why don't you make your cousin some chamomile tea?" Sloane stood frozen at the edge of the kitchen for a few seconds. Her husband, a man who usually couldn't be bothered to carry his own coffee mug to the dishwasher, was now hauling nearly 100 pounds of luggage with a light, accommodating smile. Sloane shook off her bewilderment. Maybe Vaughn was just in a stellar mood, or maybe he was trying his best to be a gracious host. She tried to rationalize the bizarre scene playing out in front of her. 2 weeks passed since Kinsey moved into the guest suite. Her presence didn't create a mess, but the atmosphere in the house began to shift in subtle ways. Sloane, initially buried in her workload as an independent interior designer, started noticing tiny, jarring details. Details that seemed insignificant on their own, but when pieced together formed a deeply unsettling mosaic. It all boiled down to Vaughn's sheer overprotectiveness regarding Kinsey. One weekend, Sloane returned from Costco. She placed several heavy bags of groceries on the kitchen island. Kinsey, who had been lounging on the sofa watching Netflix, stood up to help. "Here, Sloane, let me put those in the pantry," Kinsey said, reaching for a massive bulk case of sparkling water Sloane had just hauled in. Suddenly, hurried footsteps echoed from the staircase. Vaughn appeared, his face tight with panic. "Kinsey, don't lift that," he shouted, his volume startlingly loud. Both women jumped. Vaughn rushed over, physically intercepting the heavy case of water from Kinsey's grasp in a highly protective gesture. "It's way too heavy. You shouldn't be lifting things like that otherwise." Vaughn clipped his own sentence, shooting a rapid calculating glance at Sloane before correcting himself. "Otherwise, you'll throw your back out. Let me or Mrs. Higgins handle the heavy lifting." Sloane furrowed her brow. "Vaughn, it's just sparkling water. Kinsey isn't a toddler." "Regardless, Sloane, she's our guest," Vaughn replied swiftly, a defensive edge to his tone. Then, turning to Kinsey, his voice dropped an octave, softening drastically. "Just sit down and relax." Another incident occurred 3 days later. Sloane had prepared a rich, spicy Cajun seafood gumbo, a hearty family favorite. Usually Vaughn would devour 2 bowls on his own. However, that evening, as the three of them sat around the dining table, Kinsey suddenly clamped a linen napkin over her mouth. Her complexion turned a sickly ashen gray. "I'm so sorry, Sloane. I can't handle that strong smell," Kinsey mumbled frantically before bolting from her chair and sprinting to her ensuite bathroom. Sloane sat in stunned silence, feeling a twinge of guilt that her cooking had triggered her cousin's nausea. But Vaughn's reaction went far beyond mere awkwardness. He dropped his spoon with a clatter. Panic was etched deeply into his features. Without a single word to his wife, Vaughn practically ran after Kinsey, hovering outside her bedroom door. Sloane remained at the table, faintly overhearing her husband's muffled voice down the hall. "Are you okay? Do you want me to Postmates you something else? A chicken noodle soup from Panera? Or some plain crackers?" There was an undeniable note of intimacy in his panic. A note that belonged exclusively to a husband, worrying about his pregnant wife, not his wife's younger cousin. That night, Vaughn did exactly that. He ordered the soup through an app specifically for Kinsey and sat with her in the living room while she slowly ate it, leaving Sloane to clear the dining table entirely alone. The line between being a good host and exhibiting excessive devotion was blurring rapidly, filling Sloane's chest with a nameless, suffocating dread. Outside, a relentless drizzle fell, drumming a monotonous, lulling rhythm against the glass. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed 2:15 a.m. Sloane woke up with a parched throat. She reached across the king-sized mattress empty. The sheets on his side were completely cold. Vaughn had been up for a while. He often woke up in the middle of the night if there was a crisis at his firm, so Sloane didn't panic. Without turning on the lamps, she slipped into her silk robe and left the upstairs master suite, quietly padding down the dimly lit hardwood stairs toward the kitchen. The house was supposed to be completely silent, but as Sloane approached the archway, her ears picked up a faint, hushed whispering. It wasn't the TV, and it wasn't the rain. It was human voices. Sloane's footsteps instinctively slowed. She tiptoed carefully, avoiding the creaky floorboards she knew by heart, and pressed her back against the wall, dividing the formal dining room from the kitchen. The warm amber glow from the pendant lights above the island illuminated two silhouettes. Vaughn. Sloane's heart accelerated, pumping ice-cold blood through her veins. Kinsey was leaning against the marble countertop in a skimpy silk nightgown, clutching a glass of warm milk. Vaughn stood directly in front of her. The physical space between them was practically non-existent, far too intimate for a casual midnight chat between an in-law and a guest. "You have to be more careful, Kinsey. Don't act so recklessly in front of Sloane," Vaughn whispered, his voice heavy, practically swallowed by the stillness of the house. "I know, Vaughn, but sometimes I just can't control the nausea. My body is acting so weird," Kinsey replied, using a whiny, flirtatious tone that sent violently cold shivers down Sloane's spine. For a second that stretched into an eternity, Sloane watched as her husband's right hand reached out, gently stroking the top of Kinsey's head, before sliding down to rest affectionately on her bare shoulder, a gesture of tenderness that shattered Sloane's heart into jagged pieces. "Just hold on a little longer. We'll navigate this step by step." Sloane couldn't take another second of hiding. She wasn't ready to face whatever would happen if she stayed in the shadows. With a slightly trembling hand, she reached around the corner and flipped the main dining room switch. Click. Brilliant white light flooded the space instantly. Vaughn and Kinsey leaped apart as if they'd been struck by lightning. Vaughn's face drained of all color, and Kinsey's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped her glass. "What are you two doing in the dark?" Sloane's voice sliced through the silence. She fought to keep her tone remarkably, even though she was struggling to draw breath. Sloane." Vaughn coughed, roughly taking a frantic step backward toward the refrigerator and yanking the door open as if searching for something. Kinsey woke up thirsty. "We kept the main lights off so we wouldn't hurt our eyes. I just came down for a glass of ice water myself." Kinsey nodded vigorously, her eyes glued to the floor tiles. "Yeah, sorry if we woke you up, Sloane." "Oh," Sloane replied curtly. She walked right past them, grabbed a glass, filled it from the fridge dispenser, and drank it slowly. She kept her gaze locked on the custom cabinetry, refusing to look at her husband's face. "Vaughn, if you're done, come back upstairs. You have that executive board meeting tomorrow morning, remember?" Without waiting for his response, Sloane turned on her heel and ascended the stairs. Tucked under her duvet, that night's sleep was an impossibility. She stared blindly at the dark ceiling. "We'll navigate this step by step." The phrase echoed mercilessly in her skull. Her logical brain desperately scrambled to find 1,000 innocent explanations, but her feminine intuition was screaming a singular, agonizing truth betrayal was breathing under her own roof. Friday arrived. Mrs. Higgins, their loyal housekeeper of 3 years, had requested a week off to visit her ailing son in Grand Rapids. Sloane had granted her the time off without a second thought, slipping her a generous cash bonus for the trip. With Mrs. Higgins gone, the upkeep of the sprawling house fell back on Sloane's shoulders. Vaughn left early that morning, claiming he had an all-day golf outing with prospective clients. Kinsey, meanwhile, announced she was heading to an upscale outdoor mall to meet a college friend. The house was empty once again, leaving Sloane alone with the toxic doubts that had been devouring her since the midnight kitchen incident. To keep her mind occupied, Sloane started cleaning. She was the type of woman who found solace in immaculate spaces. After ensuring the upper floor was pristine, she moved downstairs vacuuming and mopping the living room, the den, and the kitchen. Only one zone remained: the guest suite where Kinsey lived and its adjoining bathroom. Normally, Sloane respected boundaries and hadn't set foot in there since her cousin arrived, letting Mrs. Higgins handle it. But today, it had to be done. When Sloane opened the guest room door, her nostrils were immediately assaulted by Kinsey's signature floral perfume. The room was reasonably tidy. Only a few articles of clothing were draped lazily over an accent chair. Sloane made the bed, folded the clothes, and moved into the ensuite bathroom. The bathroom was standard. Sloane scrubbed the tiles, wiped down the vanity, and polished the mirror. Her final chore was emptying the small white step trash can tucked beside the toilet. Sloane pulled a black garbage bag from a drawer and stepped on the pedal to lift the lid. The bin wasn't very full. It held some crumpled tissues, an empty dry shampoo, aerosol, and a few cotton rounds. But just as Sloane tipped the bin to empty it, her eyes locked onto something at the very bottom, half concealed beneath a wad of paper towels. It was a small, flattened cardboard box, white and pink. Sloane's hand froze midair. There was something sickeningly familiar about the branding and color scheme of that crushed box. It was the kind of packaging you found in the family planning aisle at Walgreens, not in the bedroom trash of a single 23-year-old girl claiming to be focused solely on her career. With a hand that had suddenly turned to ice, Sloane reached into the trash bin. She brushed aside the faintly scented tissues and pulled out the flattened cardboard. The bold typography on the front struck her eyes with ruthless clarity. Clear blue pregnancy test. In that fraction of a second, the oxygen in the bathroom evaporated. Sloane stumbled backward, her spine colliding heavily against the cold edge of the sink vanity. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs like a trapped bird. A pregnancy test. Her breathing turned shallow and erratic. She flipped the packaging over, searching for a shred of sanity in the suffocating panic. Maybe it's mine. Maybe I threw it out ages ago and forgot. Her rational mind immediately killed the thought. Sloane had an IUD inserted during their second year of marriage at Vaughn's explicit request. He had adamantly insisted they needed to secure their financial independence and his corporate partnership before even discussing children. She had her placement checked regularly by her OB/GYN, and her cycles were flawlessly consistent. She hadn't bought a pregnancy test in over 3 years. This wasn't hers. It was in the bathroom, used exclusively by Kinsey. With her hands now trembling violently, Sloane pulled on the thick yellow rubber gloves she used for scrubbing. She dropped to her knees, overturning the entire contents of the trash bin onto the pristine bathroom tiles. She had to find the stick itself. She had to know this wasn't just an empty box from some misplaced pharmacy run. She frantically clawed through the dry garbage, tossing aside tissue after tissue. Finally, rolling out from beneath an empty tampon wrapper was a plastic, pen-sized object. The wand. Sloane picked it up slowly, as if she were holding highly radioactive material. She held it up beneath the harsh, bright vanity lights. Inside the tiny digital window, the result was displayed. Not blurry, not fading. The word pregnant. Sloane's world stopped spinning. The air around her flash froze. That single word became the skeleton key that violently unlocked every locked door in her memory, replaying the last few weeks through a new, horrifyingly clear lens. Vaughn suddenly eager and hauling Kinsey's luggage. Vaughn aggressively forbidding Kinsey from lifting the bulk water case. Kinsey suddenly nauseous at the smell of rich seafood and Vaughn's absolute disproportionate panic. The midnight whispers in the kitchen. You have to be more careful. My body is acting so weird. We'll navigate this step by step. The puzzle pieces snap together, forming the most grotesque picture imaginable. Treason. This sweet, innocent cousin hadn't come to Chicago seeking employment. She had come seeking asylum. And this calculating, logic-driven husband, the man who slept with his back to her every night, who forced her onto birth control to focus on their portfolio, had been secretly nurturing his own unborn child in the womb of another woman. In the womb of Sloane's own flesh and blood. A violent wave of nausea surged up Sloane's throat. She whipped around, cranked the sink faucet to the maximum, and wretched emptying her stomach into the porcelain basin. Hot, involuntary tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with the cold tap water. She wept for her own blindness, for the absolute trust she had given freely, only to have it weaponized against her under her own roof. But as Sloane eventually lifted her wet face and met her own reflection in the mirror, the crying abruptly ceased. Her red, swollen eyes narrowed, emitting a frequency far colder and sharper than mere grief. Pure, unadulterated wrath. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to throw a hysterical fit when her husband walked through the door, giving Vaughn the opportunity to gaslight her, twist the narrative, or invent a new web of lies. No. She absolutely refused to grant them the satisfaction of seeing her broken. With terrifying calmness, Sloane peeled off the rubber gloves. She rinsed the plastic test under the tap, dried it meticulously with a fresh towel, and slipped it into her pants pocket. She carefully folded the cardboard packaging and kept it alongside the wand. Then she swept the remaining garbage off the floor as if nothing had ever happened, tied the black bag off and marched it out to the large green municipal bin in the alley. Sloane walked out of the guest suite, pulling the door tightly shut behind her. From this exact second forward, she was no longer a naive wife or a loving cousin. She was a director meticulously setting the stage for the most spectacular, catastrophic downfall of their lives. And that little plastic wand, now resting securely in her pocket, was going to be the star of the show. The master bedroom upstairs felt like a walk-in freezer. Standing in front of the heavy steel wall safe, hidden behind Vaughn's row of tailored suits in the walk-in closet, Sloane stared at the plastic wand in her palm. It was an inanimate object, but to her it shrieked louder than a siren. Moving with mechanical precision, Sloane placed the test and its packaging into a clear Ziploc bag. She shoved it into the deepest, darkest corner of the safe right next to the deed to the house and their marriage certificate. What a bitter, poetic irony. She spun the dial, locking away the filthy secret she had unearthed. Tears wouldn't alter the facts. Confronting them without a bulletproof arsenal of evidence would only give Vaughn, a master corporate negotiator, a loophole to manipulate reality. He was a professional at spinning facts and making himself the victim. If Sloane attacked now, Vaughn would likely invent a sob story about Kinsey getting knocked up by a reckless frat boy, claiming he was merely acting as the noble, protective in-law shielding the family's honor. Sloane didn't need denials. She needed an irrefutable confession. That evening, when Vaughn returned from his golf outing and Kinsey from the mall, Sloane greeted them in the dining room with a flawlessly polished smile. The table was set with a beautiful dinner. "How was the back nine, Vaughn? Did you win?" Sloane asked, mildly scooping garlic mashed potatoes and braised short ribs onto his plate. Vaughn loosened his silk tie, looking appropriately fatigued but pleased. "Standard stuff. The client was a bit stubborn on the margins, but we closed the deal." "What did you do all day?" "Mrs. Higgins is gone right." "Yes, I just did some light tidying up," Sloane replied smoothly. Out of the corner of her eye, she watched Kinsey take her seat across from them. The girl looked radiant, entirely unlike someone hiding a catastrophic storm inside her. "How was your day, Kinsey? Did you find a good outfit for your fellowship interview?" Kinsey offered a sweet, pearly smile. "I did, Sloane. And I caught a movie with my friend, too. Oh, dinner smells amazing. I'm starving." Sloane stared at her cousin's angelic face. Beneath the flawless skin and innocent dimples lay a rot so deep it was almost impressive. Throughout dinner, Sloane observed their interactions through her new hyper-aware lens. She saw the things that used to slip right past her. How the tip of Vaughn's leather loafer subtly shifted under the table, brushing against Kinsey's ankle. How Vaughn's gaze instinctively tracked Kinsey every time she took a bite, silently monitoring her intake. And how Kinsey, using that cloying voice, exclusively asked Vaughn to pour her water or pass the salt completely, ignoring the fact that Sloane was sitting closer. Sloane's mask of domestic bliss held firm, but beneath the table her manicured nails dug so fiercely into her own palms they left bloody crescent moons. The overture had merely begun. 3 days after the discovery in the bathroom, Sloane got her first golden opportunity. Vaughn had a habit of taking his iPhone everywhere, even into the master bathroom, under the guise of listening to Bloomberg podcasts while he showered. However, Vaughn had one fatal vulnerability. He had never changed his passcode since their wedding. The 6 digits were the month and year of his promotion to director, a milestone he considered his greatest triumph. Sloane rarely touched his devices. She valued privacy, a principle she now deeply regretted. That morning, the heavy spray of the rainfall showerhead echoed clearly from the bathroom. Vaughn had left his phone sitting on the bedside table. The screen lit up momentarily, displaying a push notification. Sloane darted from her vanity. Her heart slammed against her ribs in a frantic rhythm. She had maybe 7 to 10 minutes before the water shut off. With slightly clammy fingers, she swiped up and punched in the 6 digits, 092018. Click. The home screen unlocked. Sloane let out a shaky exhale. She didn't waste a second on other apps. Her thumb went straight for the green iMessage icon. The top threads were flooded with corporate group chats and clients. There was no contact named Kinsey anywhere on the first page. Sloane used the search bar and typed her cousin's name. The result was a mundane, months-old thread about family pleasantries and Starbucks orders. Too clean. Was Vaughn really this stupid? Her eyes scanned the pinned conversations at the very top of the app. There were 3: the executive board, Sloane wife, and auto mechanic. Sloane frowned. Since when did her husband pin a mechanic above his high-net-worth clients? Vaughn drove a leased luxury SUV that was serviced directly by the dealership. He didn't know the first thing about spark plugs. Sloane tapped auto mechanic. The second the chat history populated, the last remaining bricks of Sloane's emotional fortress turned to dust. There was no talk of oil changes or brake pads. There was an ocean of text that completely destroyed her reality. Auto Mechanic Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. Vaughn, I have some cramping in my lower stomach. Is this normal? I'm so scared. Vaughn, Tuesday, 2:17 p.m. Try to lay down, sweetheart. Don't move around too much. We're seeing Dr. Sterling tomorrow. Auto Mechanic Tuesday, 2:20 p.m. Okay. Do you think Sloan suspects anything? My heart is constantly racing. Vaughn, Tuesday, 2:25 p.m. Calm down. She doesn't know a thing. We're sticking to the original plan. Just focus on your health and on our baby. Our baby. Those two words hit Sloan in the solar plexus like a wrecking ball. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting down the rising bile. Time was running out. The water in the shower suddenly shut off. Moving with hyper-focus speed, Sloan swiped down, activated the screen recording feature on Vaughn's iPhone, and slowly scrolled through the entire chat history, capturing every damning message, and tapped the contact info too. Reveal Kinsey's actual phone number beneath the fake alias. Once the recording saved to the hidden folder, she airdropped the video file to her own MacBook, deleted the evidence of the transfer, and locked the screen. As the bathroom door handle clicked, Sloan placed the phone exactly where it had been, matching the exact angle, and sprinted silently back to her velvet vanity stool. "Oh, you haven't gone downstairs yet?" Sloan Vaughn asked, stepping out with a towel slung low around his waist, water dripping from his hair. Sloan turned slowly, calmly applying a coat of peach lipstick to her trembling lips, and offered him a warm smile in the mirror's reflection. "Just about to head down. I'm making you breakfast, honey. On Friday, I have an off-site integration meeting with the regional VPs. I'll probably have to stay overnight at a hotel near the venue, or I'll be back incredibly late," Vaughn announced over his espresso on Wednesday morning. He wore the grave-burdened expression of an executive carrying the weight of the world. "Oh, really? Where is it?" Sloan asked, casually stirring her Earl Grey. "Out in the western suburbs, Oak Brook area. I'll need to leave at the crack of dawn to beat the traffic." Sloan nodded sympathetically. "Drive safely, honey. Let me pack your vitamins for you." "No need, I have a bottle in my briefcase." A flawless performance. If Sloan hadn't read the auto mechanic texts 3 days prior, she would have kissed him at the door and wished him luck. But Sloan knew the meeting wasn't in Oak Brook. The meeting was at a private medical facility. On Friday morning, Vaughn pulled his black Escalade out of the driveway precisely at 7:00 a.m. Half an hour later, Kinsey emerged from her suite, wearing light makeup and a casual but preppy outfit. "Sloan, I'm gonna head to the downtown library. I need to research some case studies for my fellowship, and I'm meeting a friend for lunch," after Kinsey said, slipping on her designer loafers by the front door. "How are you getting there, Kinsey? Want me to order you an Uber?" Black Sloan offered her face a mask of sisterly concern. "No, I already called a Lyft. I'll just wait for it at the neighborhood gate. It's easier for the driver." Kinsey waved cheerfully and walked out. The second the door clicked shut, Sloan moved like an operative. She didn't take her own Range Rover, which her husband would spot from a mile away. The afternoon prior, Sloan had rented an inconspicuous, heavily tinted gray sedan and parked it 2 blocks over. Dressed in a black hoodie, oversized aviator sunglasses, and a surgical mask, Sloan briskly walked to the rental car, keyed the ignition, and rolled toward the subdivision's exit, keeping a massive distance. Her intuition was spot on. There was no Lyft waiting. Idling at the end of the main avenue just past the gates was Vaughn's black Escalade. Sloan watched with her own 2 eyes as Kinsey opened the passenger door and climbed into her husband's car. Sloan's blood was practically boiling in her veins, but her hands gripping the leather steering wheel remained steady. She tailed the Escalade onto the interstate. Vaughn drove casually, completely oblivious to the drab gray sedan tracking him 3 car lengths back. The drive took nearly 40 minutes before the Escalade finally signaled and turned into a sprawling, immaculately landscaped parking lot. The massive frosted glass sign at the entrance, etched with elegant gold lettering, read Crestv Fertility and Reproductive Health. Not just an OBGYN, he had brought her to the most exclusive, high-end private fertility clinic in the state, a place where patient confidentiality was guarded like Fort Knox. Sloan, parked in the furthest, most shaded corner of the lot, killed the engine and watched. Vaughn stepped out, opened Kinsey's door, and guided her toward the glass atrium. His hand was resting possessively on the small of Kinsey's back. It was a visual that made Sloan want to slam her foot on the gas and run them both over. Infiltrating an exclusive clinic required finesse. Sloan waited 5 minutes, then walked in, keeping her head down, bypassing the main desk, and heading straight for the second-floor waiting lounge. The air smelled of expensive lavender diffusers and clinical-grade antiseptic. Tucked into a plush corner couch by the floor-to-ceiling windows sat Vaughn and Kinsey. Vaughn was whispering something that made Kinsey giggle. a soft blush spreading across her cheeks. Sloane grabbed a glossy lifestyle magazine, sat in the furthest row of chairs, partially obscured by a decorative concrete pillar, and raised the pages to cover her face. Her stomach twisted into violent knots. How can they sit there so giddy, building their joy on the ashes of my life? How could Kinsey, the girl I protected from her mother's screaming matches since childhood, plunge a knife this deep into my spine? Kinsey Miller called a nurse in premium navy scrubs from the doorway of room 4. Kinsey stood up, supported by Vaughn's hand. They walked in together. The heavy wooden door swung shut, but it didn't latch completely because the nurse had paused at the threshold to grab a clipboard from a wall caddy. A sliver of an opening barely 2 inches wide was Sloane's only window. She stood up, pretending to search for the restrooms, and drifted silently until she was flush against the wall beside room 4. The exam room was intimate, and the acoustics carried perfectly through the crack in the door. From her angle, Sloane could see the glowing high-definition monitor of the ultrasound machine. Kinsey was lying back on the exam chair, the hem of her shirt pulled up. Dr. Sterling, an older, affable man, was applying the clear gel and gliding the transducer across her skin. Vaughn stood right by Kinsey's head, his hands entirely enveloping hers. "Ah, there we are," Dr. Sterling's warm voice chimed, measuring right at 7 weeks. "Growth is absolutely textbook. The gestational sac looks perfect." On the monitor, a grainy grayscale image flickered. A tiny bean-shaped cluster in the center pulsed. Then a sound filled the room, a heartbeat amplified by the machine. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Rapid, strong, and rhythmic. Is that the heart? Vaughn's voice actually cracked. "That's it, Dad," the doctor smiled. "Strong, healthy fetal heartbeat. Congratulations to you both." Sloane held her breath. Through the tiny gap, she witnessed a scene that would scorch itself into her retinas until the day she died. Vaughn, the man who had spent 5 years shutting down any conversation about starting a family, the man who forced her to prioritize their 401 ks over children, was weeping. Vaughn was shedding tears of absolute joy. He leaned down and pressed a deep, reverent kiss to Kinsey's forehead. "Thank you, Kinsey. Thank you," he choked out. Kinsey reached up, wiping the tears from Vaughn's cheek, smiling with a radiant maternal glow. The picture-perfect nuclear family built entirely on a foundation of rotting lies. Sloane's knees turned to water. She had to bite her lower lip so hard she tasted copper, just to prevent a visceral sob from ripping out of her throat right there in the hallway. She backed away blindly, turned and speed-walked to the public restrooms. Locking herself in a stall, Sloane sat on the closed toilet lid. She cried silently, her chest heaving as she let the unimaginable agony wash over her. All these years she believed her marriage was an impenetrable fortress. She had been living in a glass house resting on a fault line of deception, but as her tears finally ran dry, the despair mutated. Vaughn's tears of joy and Kinsey's victorious smile became high-octane fuel for the incandescent hatred now blazing inside Sloane's soul. If they wanted to play dirty, Sloane was going to ensure they drowned in the mud. By Saturday morning, the day after the clinic, the house had returned to its suffocating state of normalcy. Vaughn acted like a man exhausted from a grueling corporate offsite, while Kinsey attributed her lethargy to long hours studying at the library. Sloane was carrying the laundry hamper from the master suite. It was her standard routine to check the pockets of her husband's suits before sending them to the dry cleaners. Her hand slipped into the interior breast pocket of the navy bespoke blazer Vaughn had worn yesterday. Her fingers brushed against a thick, glossy piece of paper. She pulled it out. It was a standard 4x6 printout on thermal medical paper. Sloane stared at the high-contrast black and white image in her hands. The header text at the top of the scan was a death warrant, printed in plain English, Crestevie YO fertility patient Miller Kinsey date Oct 16. And right in the center, the little 7-week embryo she had watched on the monitor. Vaughn was either getting incredibly sloppy or he was so intoxicated by the euphoria of impending fatherhood that he simply forgot to dispose of the physical evidence. Sloane walked over to the bedroom window to catch the natural light. She placed the sonogram on the sill, pulled out her iPhone, and snapped dozens of photos from every conceivable angle. She zoomed in to ensure the clinic name, Kinsey's name, and the date were razor sharp. Undeniable high-definition proof. Satisfied, Sloane uploaded the files directly to a hidden encrypted Dropbox folder, just in case her physical phone was ever compromised or destroyed. Then, with an incredibly steady hand, she slid the original sonogram right back into the breast pocket of Vaughn's blazer. Let him feel secure. Let them both believe they were winning the game. The most fatal mistake a liar can make is getting comfortable in their lie. Her laundry task finished, Sloane stood before the full-length mirror in the hallway. She looked at her reflection. The puffy, red-rimmed eyes were gone, replaced by the dead, calculating stare of an apex predator. She was no longer the woman crying on a bathroom floor. The evidence collection phase was officially closed. The positive test, the screen-recorded text messages, the sonogram photos, she held all the cards. Now it was time to construct the gallows. A public execution witnessed by the entire family. Sloane offered her reflection a microscopic, soulless smile. "You want to celebrate a pregnancy behind my back," she whispered into the empty hall. "Fine. Then I'm going to throw you a baby shower the whole world will see." The preparations for the grand finale began. Immediately. Sloane knew exactly what she needed next. A shark of a lawyer, a velvet-lined shadow box, and a massive family gathering. On Monday morning, while Vaughn assumed his wife was picking out backsplash tiles for a client, Sloane walked into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of the most notoriously aggressive family law firm in downtown Chicago. She sat across the mahogany desk from Harrison Vance, a silver-haired senior partner with predatory eyes hidden behind wire-rimmed glasses. Sloane slid a thick manila folder across the desk. "I am filing for divorce immediately," Sloane stated, her voice devoid of any inflection. "But before my husband gets served, I need to guarantee that he walks out of my marriage with nothing but the clothes on his back." Harrison Vance raised a silver eyebrow, clearly intrigued by the icy composure of the woman sitting across from him. Usually his clients spent the first 20 minutes of a consultation sobbing into a box of Kleenex. "That is an aggressive mandate, Mrs. Sterling. Illinois is an equitable distribution state. What kind of leverage are we working with?" Sloane tapped the folder. "Open it." The attorney flipped the cover. Inside were high-res printouts of the auto mechanic texts, full-color copies of the Crestview fertility sonogram labeled with Kinsey's name, and heavily highlighted bank statements Sloane had pulled by hacking Vaughn's iPad showing thousands of dollars funneled into Kinsey's private Venmo account over the past 2 months. Harrison Vance adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. Adultery with a close blood relative, a pregnancy out of wedlock, and the dissipation of marital assets to fund the affair. "You compiled this dossier entirely on your own," I did. "And regarding your assets," Sloane leaned forward. "The estate we currently live in was inherited directly from my grandfather. It was placed in an irrevocable premarital trust in my name before the wedding. It is exclusively mine." "Correct. By law, inherited property kept separate from marital accounts is not subject to division. He has no claim to the house." Vance nodded, jotting notes on his legal pad. "As for our liquid assets," Sloane continued, "I know the rules. I won't drain the joint checking account because I know a judge will penalize me for it. However, I have paper trails proving that the revenue from my design firm has contributed to 70% of our joint savings over the last year. He has been siphoning my money to pay for her prenatal care. I want an ex parte temporary restraining order filed on all our joint brokerage and savings accounts the second the petition hits the docket. He doesn't get to liquidate my money to run away with his pregnant mistress." Harrison Vance gave a slow, deeply professional smile of profound respect. "You've done your homework. We will draft the petition and the asset freeze immediately. It will be completely stealth. Your husband won't know a thing until the process server taps him on the shoulder at his office." "Do not send the server to his office," Sloane interrupted, her tone dropping to sub-zero. "I am going to hand him the papers myself. Can you have the entire legal package bound, sealed, and ready by Saturday morning? It will be airtight and ready for you?" "Perfect." Sloane stood up and shook the lawyer's hand. Stage 1 of her legal execution was locked in. She had fortified a wall around her empire. Now it was time to polish the weapon. Leaving the high-rise, Sloane drove out to an artisanal, high-end, custom framing gallery in the West Loop. A brass bell chimed as she pushed through the heavy glass door. The space smelled of rich oak and oil paint. The owner, a middle-aged man with eclectic fashion, approached the counter. "Good afternoon. Looking for a specific piece, or do you have something to frame today?" "I need a custom expedited shadow box," Sloane said, reaching into her Celine tote and pulling out a hard-shell sunglass case. She popped it open. Resting inside, thoroughly sanitized with rubbing alcohol, was Kinsey's positive pregnancy test. The gallery owner blinked, visibly taken aback. He stared at the plastic wand. Framing vintage medals, pressed wedding bouquets, or autographed jerseys was his daily bread. Framing a used pregnancy test was highly eccentric. But dealing with wealthy, bizarre clients was part of the job. He recovered instantly. "I see. A very modern, highly sentimental keepsake. I assume," he asked delicately. "Extremely sentimental. It represents a monumental achievement," Sloane replied, offering a tight, empty smile. "I need this to look like a museum-grade artifact. What do you suggest?" The owner pulled out several material swatches. For an object this small to really draw the eye, we need dramatic contrast and depth. I recommend a heavy ornate wooden frame in an antique gold leaf finish, very baroque, very opulent. For the backing, we use this imported deep burgundy velvet. The blood-red backdrop will force the white and pink plastic of the wand to pop, highlighting the two lines in the digital window. Sloane visualized the description. A crown of destruction framed in gold and blood. That is utterly genius. Do exactly that. And use museum-grade anti-reflective glass. I want the wand to be crystal clear from every corner of the room. Excellent choice. It will be quite the statement piece. When do you need it? Friday evening. Name your rush fee. Sloane slapped her Amex onto the glass counter. Walking out of the gallery, Sloane felt a physical weight lift off her chest. The dirty little secret that had been festering in the dark was about to be shoved violently into the spotlight. She could hardly wait to see the looks on their faces when her artwork was unveiled. That night, propped up against the tufted headboard of their bed, Sloane held her iPad pretending to read Architectural Digest. Vaughn was aggressively towel-drying his hair in front of the vanity mirror. "Vaughn," Sloane called out, breaking the quiet. Vaughn turned around. "Yeah. It's supposed to be Aunt Corinne's turn to host the big summer family barbecue this month, but you know her townhouse is way too cramped for everyone. What if we host it this weekend? Our backyard is huge, and we have the patio space. We could get a high-end barbecue caterer, brisket sliders, the whole 9 yards." Vaughn paused, the towel hanging around his neck. A flash of hesitation crossed his eyes. A full family gathering. That's going to be chaotic. Kinsey's parents will probably drive down from Wisconsin, too. Exactly. Uncle Thaddeus and Aunt Corinne must miss Kinsey terribly. She's been living with us for almost a month. And your mother could drive up from Peoria. She's been complaining she hasn't seen us in ages, Sloane said, putting on a flawless display of eager, hospitable innocence. Vaughn weighed his options. On one hand, he despised loud family events. On the other, rejecting his wife's perfectly reasonable offer to host a beloved family tradition would look highly suspicious. Plus, it was a prime opportunity to play the role of the benevolent, wildly successful patriarch for the extended family. If you're up for organizing it, go for it. Just expense the catering to the joint card. Vaughn finally conceded. "Thanks, honey. I'll send out the invites tomorrow." Sloane smiled, a predator baring its teeth in the dark. The next day, Sloane mobilized her troops. She called Aunt Corinne, Kinsey's mother, up in Wisconsin. "Sloane, darling. It's so good to hear from you," Aunt Corinne's boisterous voice boomed through the speaker. "Hi, Aunt Corinne. I'm calling to let you know we're hosting the family barbecue this Sunday at our place. You and Uncle Thad absolutely have to come down. You can stay in the city Saturday night. Kinsey misses you both so much." "Oh, thank the Lord, we'd love to. Thad is off this weekend anyway." "How is my Kinsey doing? Is she being a burden?" "That girl can be so scatterbrained." Sloane rolled her eyes to the ceiling, but her voice poured out like warm honey. "Not a burden at all, Aunt Corinne. Honestly, Vaughn is absolutely thrilled to have her here. He's become so protective of her. He looks after her incredibly well." The double entendre slid effortlessly off her tongue. "Oh, that is such a relief. Tell Vaughn, thank you. You two are angels." Next, Sloane called her mother-in-law Eleanor. Eleanor, a woman whose entire personality revolved around desperate complaints for a grandchild, agreed to drive up instantly. The chessboard was set. The family who worshipped Kinsey, the mother-in-law, desperate for a baby, and Vaughn, the perfect husband, all of them corralled into a single blast radius. They had no idea there was dynamite wired beneath the floorboards. The days leading up to the weekend tested the absolute limits of Sloane's psychological endurance. Watching her husband and her cousin play house right in front of her was nauseating. Because Sloane appeared so deeply engrossed in party planning, Vaughn and Kinsey grew arrogant. Their guard dropped and their hidden micro-affections became increasingly bold. One afternoon, while Sloane was arranging fresh hydrangeas in the living room, she watched Vaughn hand Kinsey a mug of warm oat milk on the sofa. "Drink up, Kinsey," Vaughn murmured gently. Sloane's hyper-tuned instincts made her check the pantry later. Vaughn was smart enough to throw away the original packaging and dump the powder into a blank glass jar, but Sloane immediately recognized the chalky, vitamin-heavy smell of a prenatal supplement mix. Instead of exploding, Sloane leaned into the script. She walked over to Kinsey, carrying a plate of sliced fruit. "Drink your milk, Kinsey, and eat some fruit. You've been looking a little pale lately. You need a lot of nutrients to keep your strength up. The body is so incredibly vulnerable when it's going through major changes, isn't it?" Kinsey choked on the oat milk. She stared at Sloane, absolute terror ballooning in her pupils. What do you mean changes, Sloane?" Sloane smiled innocently, playing dumb to perfection. adjusting to the city, of course. The smog here is way worse than Wisconsin. You and Vaughn really need to guard your health. Vaughn, standing nearby, let out a microscopic exhale of relief, assuming his wife was just babbling about wellness trends. Sloane's right. You need to monitor your condition, Kinsey, he added, using his commanding executive voice to play the caring host. Behind her polite nod, Sloane filed away every agonizing detail. The way Vaughn stared when Kinsey absent-mindedly rested a hand over her flat stomach. The way Kinsey intentionally brushed her knee against Vaughn's leg when they sat together. The secret intimacy they thought was invisible was blinking like a neon sign to Sloane. On Friday evening, after retrieving her art piece from the gallery, Sloane locked the heavy package in the bottom drawer of her home office. That night, she slept like the dead. No more tears, no more heartache. Only the cold electrical anticipation of a sniper waiting for the target to step onto the X. Sunday morning broke with brilliant, cloudless skies. The weather itself seemed eager for the carnage. Sloane's expansive backyard had been transformed into an upscale event space. Elegant white tents provided shade, and a high-end catering crew manned massive smokers, carving up artisan brisket and serving truffle mac and cheese. Vaughn, wearing a crisp designer polo and looking every inch, the charismatic titan of industry, was busy shaking hands and laughing with the uncles basking in his own fabricated glory. Kinsey, wearing a loose, flowing cream-colored sundress, held court on the patio furniture. She was the center of attention for the aunts who gushed over how beautiful she looked and pestered her about job hunting and finding a nice Chicago lawyer to date. Don't you worry, Kinsey. If the fellowship doesn't pan out, you can just keep living here. Sloane and Vaughn love having you right, Vaughn. Aunt Corinne laughed heartily. Vaughn chuckled, his eyes meeting Kinsey's for a fleeting loaded second. Of course, Corinne. Our doors are always open to Kinsey. From the sliding glass doors connecting the den to the patio, Sloane surveyed the landscape. She had just finished getting ready. She wore a tailored jet black silk slip dress that hugged her frame like armor. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek chignon, and her lips were painted a deep, uncompromising crimson. She looked lethal. She radiated an aura of absolute dominance that had been dormant for 5 years. Cradled in her hands was a square box, roughly the size of a thick dictionary. It was flawlessly wrapped in premium metallic silver paper and tied with a thick burgundy silk ribbon that perfectly matched the velvet hidden inside. Sloane stepped gracefully into the main living room, the sharp click of her Louboutins drawing the attention of several people migrating inside for the AC, including Vaughn, Kinsey, and Eleanor. Goodness, Sloane, you look like you're going to a gala, Eleanor, her mother-in-law commented, swirling a glass of iced tea. What's that you're holding? A host gift, Sloane offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She walked to the large oak coffee table situated dead center in the living room and placed the silver box down with deliberate reverence. It's a surprise, Eleanor Sloane said, her voice projecting clearly over the ambient chatter. A very, very special gift. I've been organizing it all week for this exact occasion. Vaughn stepped in from the patio, his brow furrowing. He didn't remember authorizing or planning any gifts. What gift? Sloane. Who is it for? Sloane turned to her husband. She locked eyes with him, her gaze burning with an intensity that made Vaughn instinctively step back. It's not just a gift, Vaughn. It's an announcement, a celebration of some incredibly joyous news regarding our family that has been kept a tight secret. Later, when everyone is gathered, we're going to open it together so the whole family can share in the blessing. Sloane let her eyes slide off Vaughn and land directly on Kinsey, who was perched on the edge of the sofa. For a fleeting second, Kinsey looked paralyzed. The girl likely sensed the venom beneath Sloane's red lipstick, but her arrogance quickly squashed her fear. Impossible, Kinsey likely told herself. She doesn't know. Joyous news. Good Lord, are you finally pregnant, Sloane? Eleanor practically shrieked her eyes, darting eagerly to Sloane's flat stomach. The question made the entire room fall dead silent, waiting for the confirmation. Sloane's smile widened sharp enough to cut glass. Patience, Eleanor. We'll open it soon. But I can promise you this, it absolutely involves a new addition to this family. Eleanor squealed with delight, clapping her hands. Vaughn, however, remained glued to the floor. His corporate instincts were blaring red alarms, trying to calculate what the hell his wife was playing at. Sloane turned and walked back to the kitchen, leaving the silver box sitting in the center of the room like a ticking time bomb, counting down the minutes until it obliterated their lives. By 2:00 p.m., the catering crew had cleared the lunch plates. The massive family, nearly 40 people, had naturally congregated in the sprawling, open-concept living room and kitchen to escape the afternoon heat. Aunts and uncles occupied the sectional sofas while the younger cousins leaned against the marble island with cold drinks. A toast to the host delivered by Vaughn's brother had just concluded to a round of applause. It was time. Sloane picked up a decorative brass spoon and tapped it against her crystal champagne flute. Ding, ding, ding. The sharp ringing cut through the chatter. The room quieted down, all eyes turning to the woman in the black dress standing beside the coffee table. "Thank you all for coming today," Sloane began. Her voice was amplified by the acoustics of the high ceilings, steady crystalline and vibrating with authority. Having the entire family under one roof is a rare blessing. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. To Vaughn and me, family is synonymous with honesty. There should be no walls between us, no locked doors, and certainly no dirty secrets. Because blood is thicker than water, isn't that right? Sloane looked directly at Kinsey's parents, Aunt Corinne and Uncle Thaddeus, who nodded enthusiastically. "So as the hostess, I promised you all a surprise." Sloane gestured to the silver box with the burgundy ribbon resting on the table. Inside this box is a miracle. A gift that has been carefully, desperately hidden inside this house for the last few weeks. Near the hallway, Arch Vaughn stood paralyzed. A cold sweat broke out across his neck. He stared at the box, then at his wife. Something was wrong. Something was terribly, catastrophically wrong. His brain screamed at him to intervene to shut it down, but his feet felt encased in concrete. "To open this surprise, I need an assistant." Sloane let her eyes pan across the room, letting the suspense stretch until it was almost painful before extending her hand directly toward the sofa. "Kinsey, sweetheart. Would you come up here?" Kinsey jolted. Her flawless complexion turned the color of chalk. She looked frantically at her mother, then desperately sought out Vaughn, but Vaughn had averted his eyes, physically incapable of throwing her a lifeline. "Oh, go on, Kinsey! Help your cousin Aunt Corinne!" prodded excitedly. With trembling legs and shallow breaths, Kinsey stood up. Every step toward the center of the room looked as though she were wading through wet cement. She stopped on the opposite side of the coffee table, facing Sloane. "Sloane, what is this?" Kinsey whispered, her voice barely a breath. Her eyes were wide pools of raw terror. Sloane ignored the question. She addressed the room. "Kinsey, please open the box. Show your mother, show my mother-in-law, and show everyone in this room what you and Vaughn have been nurturing so carefully." Hearing his name linked with Kinsey's in that context shattered Vaughn's paralysis. He shoved his way through his relatives, his face flushed with panicked rage. Sloane cut the crap enough with the jokes. Vaughn barked, his booming voice shattering the joyful atmosphere and replacing it with instant, suffocating tension. The guests gasped. Kinsey, step away from the table. "Do not open that box." Sloane turned her neck, slowly locking onto Vaughn with eyes that looked like dead, frozen lakes. Her polite smile vanished, entirely replaced by the merciless visage of an executioner. "A joke. Didn't you say we should share our joy with the family?" Vaughn Sloane's voice cracked like a whip. "Open the box, Kinsey. Now." Kinsey's hands shook violently as she pinched the tail of the burgundy ribbon. 40 pairs of eyes were burning into her skin. Under the crushing pressure of the crowd and the terrifying gravity of Sloane's command, Kinsey pulled the knot. The ribbon slipped away. The silver paper fell apart, revealing the custom gallery box. Kinsey slowly lifted the lid. Inside lay a masterpiece of destruction. The heavy, ornate Baroque gold frame gleamed under the recessed lighting. Beneath the crystal-clear museum glass resting on a bed of rich blood-red velvet lay the white plastic pregnancy wand. 2 stark, undeniable pink lines. The silence that descended upon the room was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of 40 sets of lungs. What am I looking at?" Aunt Corinne was the first to break the void. She pushed off the couch, marching forward with a deeply confused scowl. Uncle Thaddeus followed close behind. When Corinne stood over the table and processed the image inside the gold frame, her jaw unhinged. That's a pregnancy test." The lid slipped from Kinsey's numb fingers, clattering onto the hardwood floor. The gold frame lay entirely exposed, facing the family. Eleanor, completely misreading the room, leapt up with tears of joy. "Oh my God, Sloane, you are pregnant. Why on earth did you make it sound so terrifying? You nearly gave me a heart attack." Sloane slowly shook her head. She looked away from Eleanor, her eyes drilling into Kinsey, whose face was now rapidly streaming with tears. "That does not belong to me, Eleanor," Sloane declared, her voice ringing out like a judge delivering a sentence. "That belongs to Kinsey." The statement hit the room like a fragmentation grenade. "Kinsey, what the hell are you talking about, Sloane? Don't be ridiculous. My daughter doesn't even have a boyfriend." Aunt Corinne shrieked hysterically, panic hijacking her vocal cords. She grabbed Kinsey by the arm, digging her nails in. "Kinsey, tell your mother. What is this?" Kinsey couldn't speak. Ugly, choking sobs racked her body, melting away the mascara and the facade of the innocent maiden she had weaponized. Sloan, have you completely lost your goddamn mind? Vaughn lunged forward, reaching across the table to grab the frame and hide it. Sloan reacted faster, shoving the heavy oak table backward so it screeched against the rug out of his reach. Do not touch my evidence, Vaughn. Evidence of what? She got knocked up by some frat guy at school, and I've been trying to help her figure it out without ruining her life. Vaughn roared, deploying the exact pathetic alibi Sloan had predicted. Let's see about that. Sloan picked up her iPhone from the table. She swiped down to her control center and tapped the screen mirroring icon. Instantly, the massive 5-inch flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace, which had been displaying a serene screensaver of the Amalfi Coast, flashed to black. A second later, it illuminated with the stark white interface of an iMessage thread. The text was massive, easily readable from the back of the room. All 40 heads whipped toward the screen. Aunt Corinne wanted to know who her unmarried daughter is pregnant by Sloan, announced over the rising chaos. Let's read it together. Sloan pressed play on the video recording of Vaughn's phone. The screen scrolled smoothly through the damning texts. Vaughn, I have some cramping in my lower stomach. Is this normal? I'm so scared. Try to lay down, sweetheart. We're seeing Dr. Sterling tomorrow. Do you think Sloan suspects anything? She doesn't know a thing. Just focus on your health and on our baby. Our baby Sloan read the final text aloud, her voice echoing off the walls. She looked at Eleanor, who was now clutching the fabric over her chest, gasping for air. He's quite the attentive mechanic, isn't he, Eleanor? It's a fake. She faked those texts to ruin me. Vaughn screamed his face, purple veins bulging in his neck. My phone was hacked. Lying requires intellect, Vaughn. You're severely outmatched, Sloan retorted. She swiped to the next file in her album. The 7.5-inch screen transitioned. Now it displayed a massive, high-definition photograph of a medical sonogram. In the top left corner, the name Miller Kinsey was impossible to miss. In the center was the 7-week embryo. Crestview Fertility Clinic. Last Friday, at 9:00 a.m., Sloan's voice sliced through the cacophony of gasps and horrified murmurs. While my highly respected husband claimed to be at an executive off-site in Oak Brook, he was actually renting a VIP suite to listen to the fetal heartbeat inside my own cousin's womb. A child conceived in my house in the bed I changed the sheets on every Sunday. Smack. The sound of flesh hitting flesh was deafening. Aunt Corinne, her eyes bloodshot with an unholy mixture of rage and catastrophic shame, had backhanded Kinsey across the face with everything she had. The force of the blow sent Kinsey sprawling onto the floor. You ungrateful, filthy whore, Aunt Corinne shrieked hysterically, tears flooding down her face. This is how you repay the cousin who put a roof over your head. You sleep with her husband. Mom, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Kinsey wailed from the floor, clutching her blazing red cheek. She reached out for her father's pant leg, but Uncle Thaddeus violently stepped away from her. The older man stood, with his head bowed, his shoulders shaking with silent, broken sobs. He couldn't even look at his daughter. In the corner, Eleanor swayed on her feet. The realization that her desperately wanted first grandchild was the byproduct of a sickening, incestuous affair perpetrated by her golden boy son was too much for her heart to process. Vaughn, what have you done? Eleanor whispered weakly, before her eyes rolled back and she collapsed onto the sofa. Mom! Several aunts rushed over, frantically fanning the unconscious woman. Vaughn looked around wildly. His family, his pristine corporate reputation, his absolute pride, it was all disintegrating into ash in real time. He turned back to Sloan, his hands balled into tight, shaking fists. Are you happy now, Sloan? Are you satisfied that you humiliated us in front of everyone? Sloan didn't flinch. She didn't retreat a single inch. She tilted her chin up, radiating an icy, untouchable power that caused Vaughn's manufactured courage to instantly evaporate. I'm not finished. Sloan raised her hand and snapped her fingers toward the hallway leading to the garage. Two men in catering uniforms, staff whom Sloan had heavily bribed beforehand, emerged. Trailing behind them, rolling heavily over the hardwood, were two massive suitcases. One was Vaughn's black Toomey luggage. The other was Kinsey's giant pink hardshell. The men parked the suitcases right by the open front door, then hastily retreated to the backyard to avoid the fallout. Vaughn stared blankly at his luggage. What the hell is this? Sloan walked over to the console table beneath the TV and picked up the thick manila folder Harrison Vance had prepared. She strode up to Vaughn and slammed the heavy folder directly into his chest. Vaughn fumbled, and the stack of documents bearing the official blue seals of the Cook County Circuit Court spilled onto the floor. That is my petition for divorce, alongside an emergency ex parte injunction, freezing every single one of our joint assets, Sloan stated, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. I have locked down all the accounts. You will not touch a single cent of the money I earned to fund your pathetic midlife crisis." Vaughn dropped to his knees, his trembling fingers picking up the court-stamped asset freeze. His eyes widened in absolute horror as he read the injunctions. He had been checkmated. Legally, financially, and socially annihilated. "You can't just kick me out, Sloan. My name is on the mortgage. This is my house, too," Vaughn bellowed, desperately clawing for any remaining scrap of leverage. Wrong. Sloan fired back, her tone lethal. "This property is held in an irrevocable premarital trust deeded in my name long before I made the catastrophic error of marrying you. By law, you are nothing but a guest here. And your checkout time has expired." Sloan pointed a rigid finger toward the open front door where the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the two suitcases. "Take your mistress. Take your bastard child. And get the hell out of my house." Kinsey, still sobbing hysterically on the floor, was hauled up roughly by the fabric of her dress by Uncle Thaddeus. Without an ounce of parental warmth, he dragged his daughter toward her pink suitcase. Aunt Corinne turned her back, refusing to look at Kinsey, sobbing apologies to Sloan through her hands. Vaughn remained on his knees for a long moment. He looked at his mother being revived with smelling salts at his uncle's, staring at him with raw disgust, and finally, up at Sloan. The wife he had genuinely believed was naive, docile, and easily manipulated was standing above him like an avenging goddess. There was no room for negotiation. There was zero margin for forgiveness. With his shoulders slumped and the last remnants of his arrogance shattered, Vaughn slowly stood up and trudged toward his black suitcase. He didn't say another word as he crossed the threshold. Kinsey followed him, her head bowed in ultimate shame, her face hidden behind her messy hair. Sloan followed them to the entryway. She stood on the porch, the warm summer breeze catching her hair, and watched the backs of the two traitors as they dragged their luggage down the long driveway, exiled under the burning, judgmental stares of the entire extended family. Sloan took a slow, deep breath. The air in her lungs felt impossibly crisp, infinitely lighter. The rot had been excised. She turned around, stepped back inside, and pulled the heavy mahogany front door shut, throwing the deadbolt with a loud, echoing clack. The end of the betrayal. And the very first page of her freedom.